Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion and the beautiful Katie.
Hello.
Today we are coming to you from Dixon, Illinois, and Dixon, Illinois actually was named after a man named Dixon. Behind us is Fort Dixon, and Fort Dixon was the reason that Abraham Lincoln came here. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. So this is a fort recreation for Fort Dixon. This wasn't put here until the late 1800s, but they have a statue over here to the great Abraham Lincoln. And it's a pretty unique statue because it's the only statue, to my knowledge, that's ever been done of him while he was in military clothing. So they've established him. This was his years as a soldier, 1832. And what's interesting is he would come back here in 1856 to Dixon, Illinois to help the first Republican candidate for president. Pretty amazing statue of Lincoln. A very, very young Abraham Lincoln as well. This town's really good, as we've noticed all over town, about having descriptions for what happened at the building, having really good historical information. So this is no different. It says Abraham Lincoln was stationed here during the Black Hawk War in 1832 as captain of volunteers. On April 21st, 1832, he enlisted at Richland Creek, Sangamon County, which was where his home was, and was elected captain. He was mustered into state service at Beardstown on April 22nd and into United States service at the mouth of Rock River, May 3rd, which is here. At the mouth of Fox River on May 27th, he was mustered out and on the same day re-enlisted as a private in Captain Elijah Isles' company at the expiration of the enlistment. He re-enlisted on June 16th at Fort Wilbourn in Captain Jacob M. Early's company and was finally mustered out of service on July 10th, 1832 at Whitewater River, Wisconsin. Kind of difficult to see here, but you see on the back of the stone, or the back of the statue, there's John Dixon right there, the founder of the city, and his property, Fort Dixon, would have been right here. And the Dixon Tavern and Ferry. Pretty incredible statue, I have to say. Looks pretty amazing. So now we're going to take you across the river and show you where he made history in 1856. So right over here by the Dixon Arch, we have quite a bit of history for Lincoln. You see this house over here, that is got a little bit of Lincoln history. And then right here at the courthouse, the old Lee County Courthouse, on the other side of the courthouse, they have a stone commemorating what Lincoln did here in his later years. So the stone's a little bit difficult to read, but what it says is Lincoln stood here while delivering his great speech July 17th, 1856. Now, the plaque beside it tells us what happened, and it's a pretty extraordinary event because he went from being, as you saw over at the statue, being a soldier to now he's campaigning for helping people run for president. So at the time, this was the election year when the Republican Party had first been established. They had nominated or named a man named John Fremont, who actually, surprisingly, the Democrats also wanted as their nominee and had asked him, and he turned them down because he had been, for several years, he had been a general and helped the expansion of California, or, you know, the United States expanding into California, but he was at one point court-martialed because they were basically saying that he was just destroying and slaughtering people to do it. And then it got reversed and he was given his job back in the military, but he retired from the Army, bought property in California, and then discovered gold and just immediately became a very wealthy man pretty much overnight, and then became California, or that part of California's first senator. So Lincoln knew his history. He was actually the one that had appointed him the General of the West. And so on June 19th, John Fremont was nominated as the first Republican candidate for president. Fremont, who had explored and pioneered the opening of the West, was a former U.S. Senator from California and an open, vocal opponent of slavery, which caused his defeat in 1856. Abraham Lincoln campaigned for Fremont here in Dixon, also in Oregon and Sterling, Illinois, and gave a 2-hour speech here on the courthouse lawn to about 1,500 citizens on July 17th, 1856. That night, Lincoln stayed at the Nachusa House, which was that house that we showed you across the street. So we'll go over and take a look at that. They have a plaque there as well. It's pretty amazing to think about. I mean, honestly, if you think of it, 1856, that was the first nominee ever for Republican president. And then Lincoln himself, a few short years later, would become president. And not even 10 years from this, he would already be dead. But think of 1,500 people out here listening to his speech. He loved to talk. I mean, that's one thing that I keep reading, is that if he planned a debate or if he planned anything, they weren't short speeches. They were like planned on being hour and a half, 2-hour type events. Sounds like a fun guy to talk to, huh, Katie?
Well, I think he'd talk your ear off, but he did have a lot of important things to say, so what can you do?
Kind of amazing also to see, if you saw the other video, here in Dixon, of course, was the boyhood home of Ronald Reagan. And so right across the street from the courthouse where Lincoln would make history, we have a tribute to Ronald Reagan's history. So important town for the history of our presidency. It's interesting, Illinois, we were learning on a tour here, you know, it's funny, they have one president that really was born here, which is Ronald Reagan, but Abraham Lincoln is, Illinois is the land of Lincoln, and then of course Ulysses S. Grant, but there's also Barack Obama, so 4 presidents. So that was the Nashua house that Lincoln stayed in that night after delivering that speech. So we'll go over and take a look at the plaque. But we're gonna head a little further north. We're gonna go about an hour north today, because there's another very interesting historic spot there that Lincoln really changed his course of history. It's his famous debate against Douglas, where he kind of made a name for himself. I thought that'd be a interesting place to check out today. Looks like in its apartment building now. Well, it doesn't say anything about Lincoln staying here. It just says that it was built in 1837, so we definitely know it was here. I'm guessing that there was a Lincoln plaque, probably right here, that's been removed. Somebody probably stole it. So that's unfortunate. So here we are in Freeport, Illinois, and we are in Debate Square. And as you can see, it's memorializing in 1958 the second joint Lincoln-Douglas debate. Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. Now what's interesting is that debate, Lincoln requested this debate, but when he requested the debates, he wanted it to be like a series of like over 100 of them. So I think, if I remember right, Douglas agreed. First he said no, then they say he was so popular at the time, he kind of had a big head, and he was like, okay, I'll debate you 7 times. So it says, within this block was held the second joint debate in the senatorial contest between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, August 27, 1858. I am not for the dissolution of the Union under any circumstances. This government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free Lincoln. And it was dedicated by Teddy Roosevelt. And you'll notice they have plaques kind of all over the park. Like this one right here is talking about when they dedicated that boulder that we just saw. But over here they have statues of the debate. The interesting thing was that at the time, like I mentioned, Douglas was maybe one of the most popular, if not the most popular, senator in the country. And at the end of these debates, he actually won, but Lincoln was relatively quasi-unknown before that, and this really propelled him into the spotlight. So if you notice down here, it says they had the debate here in 1858. 1860, he was elected president. And ironically, just a year after he's elected president, Douglas dies. This is fascinating. Before we even get to the statues, this is talking about how this particular set of debates, Lincoln-Douglas debates, were the first political campaign where reporters were actually traveling along with the candidates to cover these debates. So the first thing you'll notice, or that I notice anyway, is Stephen Douglas was a very short man. If this is true to form, Lincoln sitting down is almost as tall as him. I mean, geez, Lincoln's hat's almost as tall as him. I'm kidding. God, great job they did on these. Lincoln was, at the time, the Republican Party had just been established like 2 years before this, and so he was a Republican. Douglas was a Democrat. And Lincoln was a talker. He prided himself on debate and things like that, so no surprise that he would want to debate the most popular senator at the time. Katie's over here looking at this plaque, and it says that these are life-size sculptures. So there you can see the women working on the sculptures. You can see all around this, it has all the names of the towns that they did their debates in. All the way to Alton. And over here they have a copy of the Freeport Weekly Journal, and the Freeport was reporting, it said the newspaper article headlined, "The People for Lincoln proclaims that Lincoln won the popular vote, defeating Douglas. However, 1858 United States senators were elected by the state legislature, not the popular vote. 17th Amendment to the Constitution changed the election of senators to popular vote in 1913. Since the Democrats controlled both houses of the legislature at the 1858 election, Douglas was assured re-election to the Senate regardless of the outcome." So that also makes sense as to why he'd agree to do it. Says Douglas's response to Lincoln's question about the exclusion of slavery from a territory prior to formation of a state constitution is tied to an 1857 United States Supreme Court case. That was something that they had been, right before this, Douglas had been successful in beating the president at the time. They were fighting over Kansas in 1860. The re-election of Stephen Douglas to the United States Senate was not the end of the story, because the coverage of the debates provided Lincoln with support from abolitionists from the East. So in 1860, the Republican convention in Chicago, they nominated Abraham Lincoln as their candidate for United States president. And of course, as we know, because of him, his presidency, they went into the Civil War and eventually abolished slavery. So they actually have a plaque about that, what I was just talking about. It was the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and it was stating that in the Missouri Compromise, it required that Kansas and Nebraska both remain free states. The problem was that the fact that Kansas was being settled by pro-slavery advocates. So Douglas argued for what he called popular sovereignty, letting the people of the state or territory decide for themselves whether or not to be a free or slave state, rather than Congress making the decision. So pretty cool statue, considering it's crazy to think that the outcome of this made no difference. He was going to win either way, but because of this, Abraham Lincoln got himself to the presidency. Hope you guys enjoyed our day of Lincoln history. Have a great night, and we will see you in the next vlog.
Goodbye.